Um, Great. Welcome everybody to this webinar that's being hosted by the International Refugee Assistance Project and Advocates for Human Rights. We are so glad to have you join us and to share this information with you today. Thank you so much for being available. Um, I first want to introduce me and my colleague Becca. We will be the webinar host today, so we will be managing the chat and all of the technology. Um, yes, Jim, translation will start in 1 second. I will take a pause. Um, yeah, so first I just want to introduce me and Becca, who will be doing the tech support today. And now I'll pause for our interpreter to translate that. Great. Yes. Just want to confirm that folks who have set up the Dari channel could hear that properly to make sure that the interpretation is working. No, it's okay. Okay, we're good. Um, so, as I mentioned, for those of you just joining, we will be having interpretation in Dari today. Unfortunately, our Somali interpreter couldn't make it on the last minute, so we haven't been able to set that up, but we will be happy to share some more information in Somali following this presentation too for people who need that information. But if you want to listen to this webinar, in Dari, our interpreter will be translating and he can introduce himself in a second. But please go to the icon in the bottom of your screen to select the language and select the Persian channel. Just if you want to introduce yourself, Farid. Thank you. Um, so just a few other disclaimers. We are recording this presentation just to have the informational purpose recorded, but no other recording is permitted, and the questions will not be recorded. So just know that when we move to the Q&A questions, those will just be shared in this space, not externally. This webinar does not include legal advice, so we can just give information about what's happening generally, but the lawyers who are in the call cannot give you specific information about your case, your situation, of your family situation. So, in support of that, please do not share any personal or case-specific information. We want this space to be as accessible as possible, which means there's no sort of like betting or anything like that in on our end. So, please exercise caution accordingly. And I'll pause for interpretation before passing it on to Becca. Great. Thank you, Farid. Becca, I'll pass it on to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Here's our plan for this webinar today. We're going to introduce all of our panelists. Then we're going to talk about knowing your rights when you encounter ICE. Then we'll talk about revetting interview information, a little bit more about what to expect with these revetting interviews, kind of what they are. And then we'll have an explanation of our ongoing lawsuit in Minnesota that IRAP and Advocates for Human Rights are a part of. Yeah, and then we'll finish everything up with questions and answers at the end. Great, thank you. Okay, we'll start with just some quick introductions. I'll start with my colleague from Advocates for Human Rights. Hannah, if you want to just give a quick intro for yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hannah Sandison. I am the director of the Immigration Legal Services Program at the Advocates for Human Rights here in Minneapolis. And we serve clients that are in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota.
I can go next. Since I'm next up, I think on the screen. My name is Mary Ghandour. I'm the Director of Global Pro Bono with IRAP, the International Refugee Assistance Project.
I can go next. My name is Mevluda Akai Alp, and I am a U.S. litigation senior staff attorney at IRAP.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I will pass it to Hannah to tell us about know your rights when encountering ICE.
Great. Thank you so much. So as many of you may know, but it's always good to have a refresher. You do have rights in the United States, whether or not you're a citizen, whether or not you have any lawful status, you still have rights under the U.S. Constitution. So it's important to know that if immigration authorities, that could be ICE, Border Patrol, someone acting with the Immigration Department of Homeland Security, if they come to your home, you should not open the door. In order to enter your home, officers must show you a warrant that is signed by a judge. And that should be a state or federal judge, not an immigration judge, and not an officer in the Department of Homeland Security. And they have to show you that warrant in order to enter your home. Even if the officers have a judicial warrant, most of them don't, but even if they do, you still have the right to remain silent. You do not have to answer their questions, and you have the right to call a lawyer. If ICE officers approach you in public and question your legal status, you can provide proof of your refugee status. If you're over the age of 18, you should carry those documents with you at all times, just in case you need to show them to an officer if they ask for them.
Han, I just want to pause you for a second so the interpreter can jump in.
Sure. Let me know when I can start again. Okay. So the documents that you can carry with you, if you're over the age of 18, are your I-94, which is your arrival and departure record, your transportation or boarding letter or boarding foil, your employment authorization document or work permit card, and if you've applied for your green card, evidence that you filed. So that could be your I-797C or your receipt notice. And I will pause for interpretation. As unfortunately, even if you do everything right, sometimes things still go wrong. So it's important to be prepared in the event that something does go wrong. If you're worried about being detained at an interview or an appointment that you have with immigration officials, make sure that you have a plan for how you will tell your loved ones or trusted contacts what has happened to make sure that that they know what happened to you and you won't have much time at that point in order to prepare. So be sure that you're preparing ahead of time. I'll pause for translation. Hopefully you don't need this plan, but it is better to have a plan in place in case of emergencies. So what we recommend you do is ensure that a family member or trusted friend knows your A number. They know how to locate, how your A number can be found. And if they don't have that memorized, so it's on some of your under some of your documents, and there's some resources available attached to this webinar to show you how to find your A number if you don't know. Your date of birth, the country of your birth, and the country of your nationality. And those things will help them locate you if you are detained. I'll pause for interpretation. The next piece of it is about phone numbers. So we recommend that you memorize the phone number of that trusted friend or family member so that you have that in your mind in case you don't have any property with you if you are detained. And we also recommend that if you have a lawyer or a legal representative, that you ask for their business card and write down their phone number Keep that phone number with you at all times and make sure that your trusted friend or family member has that phone number as well and can contact that representative in case you are detained. Pause for interpretation. And that is all that I have, so I will pass it over to Mary, who has the next piece of the program.
Thanks so much, Hannah. So, as you might be aware, individuals with refugee status in Minnesota are starting to receive notices to their homes from an agency called the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. These notices are called call-in letters and say call-in letter on the top. And they require refugees to attend an interview that revets or reviews their refugee status in the United States. If you are scheduled for one of these revetting interviews, you must attend this interview, and we strongly suggest that you contact an attorney for legal advice before the interview. And at the end of my section, I'll provide some information about how to request legal assistance with this kind of interview. So, what is this interview? It is an interview where the government is reviewing or reassessing your refugee case. And this is the application process that you went through outside the United States for refugee status in the US. It will focus on the original refugee interview that you had overseas, what happened in the country that you are from, and anything that might be inconsistent in your testimony now compared to then. Um, It is important if you are scheduled for one of these interviews that you discuss the specific harms that you yourself will fear will happen to you if you had to return to your home country. And you cannot just generally talk about that it will be bad if you were to return to your home country. You need to talk about how it impacts you individually. In addition to explaining what will happen to you, you have to also explain why this harm would happen to you specifically. For instance, whether it's because of your political opinion, your religious belief, your sexuality, or another reason specific to who you are. You might also be asked other questions in this interview. For instance, whether you have given any type of assistance or money to a terrorist organization, including any bribes or money that you had to pay to get documents, even if it was your only option to get a document to be able to leave your country, for example. You may also be asked whether there is anywhere else within your home country that it is safe for you to live within. And it's important that you explain why other places are not safe for you and your family. And that even if you were in a third country before you came to the United States, for instance, if you lived in a refugee camp in another country, that you never had access to permanent status or citizenship there in that other country. And we recognize that you might be asked about things that happened to you and your family many years ago, or you might be asked about things you spoke about in an interview overseas that happened many years ago. So, for this reason, we strongly recommend working with a lawyer or a legal representative to prepare for your interview. We also want to flag that you should be prepared that these interviews can last for many hours, sometimes 3 to 5 hours or more. And you should ask for a break if you are scheduled for one of these interviews at any point if you need one, and just be prepared for the long wait times during the interview itself. I'm not sure if I lost the interpreter. Okay. No, no. Though it can be very scary to be scheduled for one of these interviews, it is very important that you go to the appointment. If you miss an appointment without asking for a new appointment time, you will receive a letter called a notice of intent to terminate, which means that the government wants to terminate or take away your refugee status. Similar to the interview notice, this notice of intent to take away your refugee status would be sent through the mail, and would end up either in your mailbox or possibly in the mailroom of your apartment complex, and should include information about how you can appeal this decision to potentially take away your refugee status. Now, if you receive an interview notice and you aren't able to attend at the date and time of the interview, you can request that an attorney or a legal representative deliver a letter to the government office in person, asking for a new appointment date and time. And one reason that has been acceptable for rescheduling these interviews is if you cannot take time off of work to make the interview appointment. Now, during the interview itself, the government is required to provide an interpreter for you, and the interpreter most likely will join through the telephone. So you won't have an interpreter in person with you unless you bring your own interpreter. You should not have to bring your own interpreter if you're not told to do so in the letter that you receive scheduling your interview. And if USCIS or the government rather refuses to provide you with an interpreter, or if you don't feel comfortable with the interpreter that is provided to you for any reason, you should feel confident to insist that an interpreter be provided to you before continuing with the interview. Okay. Now, what should you bring with you to one of these reviewing or revetting interviews? You should bring, of course, a copy of the interview notice along with a photo ID. This could be your state driver's license or your work authorization document issued by USCIS. And as I mentioned, an attorney or a legal representative can also come with you, though it's not required for you to bring a lawyer to this interview with you, and the government will not provide one for you. In terms of who should come with you to the interview notice will tell you if your spouse and your children should come with you. But for many of these interviews, the government um, mostly just wants to interview the person who was the principal applicant on the refugee case and not the relative. But either way, you should follow the directions on your interview notice about who should come with you and what you should bring. And lastly, if you have not yet submitted your green card application, or rather your application for permanent residency, we advise that you submit this as soon as possible and you bring a prepared copy of the form, which is called a Form I-485, with you to the interview if possible. Okay. And importantly, we want to note that so far we don't know what is going to happen next after these interviews, as no one has yet received a decision who has been interviewed over the past 6 weeks since these revetting interviews have started in Minnesota. Okay. Now, if you receive a letter asking for you to come in for an interview to review your refugee status, or if you receive a letter stating that the government believes that your refugee status may not be valid, which is called a notice of intent to terminate, you should contact your resettlement agency right away. And you can also call the Refugee and Immigrant Helpline to request that you be connected with an attorney without cost. There might only be a few days between the day that you receive the notice for an interview and your interview date, so you should call the helpline right away if you would like the Resettlement Programs Office to try to find an attorney to work with you. And unfortunately, we can't guarantee that an attorney will be available, but the Resettlement Programs Office will try to connect you with an attorney who can assist you. Um, the phone number for the hotline is in the chat. Um, it is 1-800-814-4806. And you can call and speak to someone in whatever language you prefer. They can add an interpreter to your phone call if you need one at the time you call to request assistance. And if you have any other questions or need other legal assistance, you can also contact that helpline number and they'll try to connect you with other resources. And with that, I will wrap up my section. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to talk now about a lawsuit that we filed on January 24th,
Sorry, Meg.
2026.
Just to give the interpreter a second to translate that last bit.
So I'm going to talk now about a lawsuit that we filed on January 24th, 2026, challenging the detention of refugees in Minnesota.
But I can hear you.
Okay, I was pausing for interpretation, but maybe that was too soon. In early January of this year, the Department of Homeland Security announced that it would target and investigate up to 5,600 refugees residing in Minnesota through a campaign called Operation Paris. Following this, lawfully present refugees in Minnesota, including families and children, have been subject to warrantless arrest, unauthorized detention, and coercive interrogation in difficult conditions because of this policy. In our lawsuit, a group of refugees filed a class action lawsuit for all refugees like them who had been arrested and detained by ICE in Minnesota or were at risk of arrest and detention by ICE in Minnesota. And it's important to note that this lawsuit is trying to stop the policy of detaining refugees just because they have not yet received their green card. And it only applies to refugees residing in Minnesota. And the lawsuit is called UHA v. Bondi. And just to explain what has happened in the lawsuit so far, on January 28th, a Minnesota court ordered ICE to stop arresting and detaining refugees who have not yet received green cards and to immediately release all refugees detained in Minnesota under this policy. That was just a temporary order, and it was in place for 28 days until February 25th, 2026. While that order was in place, we had oral argument on February 19th before the Minnesota court, and we asked the district court judge to issue a preliminary injunction, which has no expiration date. So on Friday, February 27th, the judge issued a preliminary injunction in our case. The judge is called Judge Thunheim, and he ordered that ICE can't arrest or detain refugees in Minnesota just because they don't yet have their green cards. And that order is in place while this case continues in the Minnesota District Court. And just to be clear, this preliminary injunction only stops ICE from detaining refugees because they don't have their green cards yet. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, can still issue refugees in Minnesota these notices to attend revetting interviews. And if you receive one of those notices to attend a revetting interview and you don't attend or reschedule it, the Department of Homeland Security may try to terminate your refugee status or put you in removal proceedings. So, in terms of what's next, it is possible that the government will appeal the court's order issuing the preliminary injunction. And the case, if it does that, the case would then go up to a higher court on appeal. The judge's order that we got in at the end of February likely won't be the last word on whether the government can continue this policy. But as of now, the government hasn't yet appealed.